Hey, Link here. Thanks for joining me for episode 113, where I speak with Colin McInerney. In this episode, we talk about how they got into the industry and some words of encouragement, games that made him want to make games, marketable characters and favorite games, games that he enjoyed as a kid that don't get enough credit, life outside of gaming, and some lightning round questions. Before we get started, don't forget there are links in the episode description that you can follow to learn more about Colin as well as the podcast. Also, don't forget to like and share the episode, and without further ado, enjoy episode 113. Hi, and welcome to the Red Tunic podcast, a podcast where I look to rediscover what makes gaming fun and enjoyable by having positive conversations with those related to the industry. My name is Link, and today I'm joined by Colin McInerney, who has previously contributed to games such as Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3 and is now studio head at Pedalboard Games. Hi, Colin. How are you doing today?
Link, I'm doing all right. How are you?
I am doing okay. It's Monday. And as much as I hate making the Garfield joke, it's Monday. But I'm doing okay for a Monday. How about yourself?
I would pretend that it's a 3-day weekend, it's a holiday, but I'm working entirely for myself now. So the holidays are when I choose not to work.
I forget who it was I spoke to, but they said the real sign of being like in charge of your studio, being like, your own master or however you want to look at it, was being able to decide when you faff off to the beach and not work for the day. And I think, you're already kind of there. If you said, any 3-day weekend is any day or any week you decide not to work the one day, right? So like you're already there. That's great to hear.
Yeah, although I think the problem is that I can't work a job where I have to work like 40 hours a week and it's like 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. But if I have to work like 4 to 6, 7 days a week, just like at hours that I dictate, I absolutely will. And I'll have a great time doing it. I think since starting Pedalboard and since starting the current project, I have spent the last week and a half working on this game for about 6 hours a day in just like 1 to 2 hour bursts and having such a fun time doing it.
As someone that is not able to do that in the sense of I work up, the standard 9 to 5 kind of fun nonsense. I am envious of you because that's a wonderful way to do it. Like, if you can make it work where you're just like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna work for a few hours, then go whatever for a few hours, come back, put a few hours in, what have you, what have you. Like, I'm a big proponent of, you put the hours in. Don't not having to worry about having your butt in the chair. Just put the hours in. So I'm happy to hear that works for you, and as I said, a little bit envious. Now, before we get started, Colin, if you don't mind, could you tell me about yourself? Like tell me and anyone listening a little bit about yourself, kind of like the 411, the elevator pitch, the core things that you think anyone should know about you, just so they get an easy baseline.
Sure. So I'm Colin McInerney. I live about an hour outside of DC in a small town called Frederick, Maryland. I grew up in DC, went to college in Chicago, and then lived in Austin for about 8 years until I moved here. I've been making video games for probably upwards of 2 decades, in that, when I was a kid and a teenager, I was like programming in micro worlds and animating in Flash and even programming with like ActionScript and making like choose your own adventure games in Flash and submitting terrible stick figure animations to Newgrounds. And when I went to college, I got serious about game development as something I wanted to do. And ended up moving to Austin as a result of that. And I worked at Alchemy Labs for 5.5 years, where I released a bunch of generally well-regarded VR games, and then wanted to go make more money, and then realized I hated making money at the expense of having any artistic control. And so now I've gone completely in the opposite direction, where I have zero money coming in, but I'm making indie games with cool people and just loving it. And that's who I am today.
So, thank you for sharing that. And I like I like the transition from um, working someplace, getting paid, wanting to make more money, and going to another place to get paid, and then going, well, I want to have more control, and then going to not getting paid. I like
Like,
it's such a
actually,
wild pipeline.
it's also so funny because so I was at Alchemy for about 4 months, and then they got acquired by Google. And that was enough that I was able to like put the down payment on a house in Austin. Which, when that happens to you at 23, it is just insane. Like, yeah, I still have a mortgage, but like I own a house, right? And I was able to use that to buy my place in Frederick too. So I've got like expenses, but I have this, like, if all were to somehow go to, I could sell my house and start renting. And while that would be inconvenient and terrible for a huge number of reasons, it's the kind of thing that has enabled me to just be like, f it, there are no jobs anyway. Why not take that risk now? Because like trying to find a job in the current game industry market is only going to prolong that same situation until my job runs out again, and then I'm back exactly where I started, and I'm tired of that. And then, but to get to that kind of decision, I left Alchemy to go work for Ready at Dawn Studios, who were unceremoniously shut down by Meta, and I got caught in a wave of layoffs before that happened. And so this so-called, stability that the game industry at these big companies has touted was just absolutely shattered. And I was completely barred from doing any side projects while I was working at Meta. I tried to work on Strange Scaffold games, and they told me it was a conflict of interest and that I couldn't do it. So within about a month of working under Meta, I was actively looking for other jobs, trying to leave. And then I got hired by an indie studio called Hackjack Games, and they were shut down by Tiny Build, and that was kind of the best job I'd ever had, because I was working with a tight-knit team of wonderful people on an indie game that we all were really excited about and believed in, and then it was just shuttered, and it was like, hey, there's literally nothing safe about this industry. I might as well take a shot at it myself, because I don't think having a job is any safer.
So I don't think anyone can argue with at least I can't argue with that logic, because it makes perfect sense, right? Like, you take the demon that or the monster that could be,
Oh, yeah.
and when both of them have the same worst case scenario, or sorry, let me rephrase that. When the demon that has a higher than likely worst case scenario, and the
Yeah.
monster that may be has a smaller chance, like, yeah, that's easy logic on my part to be like, yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I'm fingers crossed for everything working out for you
Thank you.
with like the upcoming game or games or the studio. That's the way to put it. The upcoming studio, because you should always wish for success, and that success means multiple games, right? Like, I've seen
Yes.
a few studios where they're like, the verbiage that they use, it seems like they're just really hoping for a good one and done, and not because they want to make it rich. They're just their aspirations are one game, and then hopefully see what comes next. It's like, guys, fingers crossed you do more than one game, that you have
Yeah.
a good lucrative career, right? So, fingers crossed for the studio that you guys are successful and continue to be successful. Is
I
the
hope
nicest
so.
way to put it.
Thank you. I sincerely thank you.
Now I did want to mention something, just because, you mentioned Flash, and if anyone is curious, Flash is a thing that used to exist years ago before Adobe killed it, and it's what let you play video games online. That's the short and dirty version of it. It was a thing. Sorry, anytime I have a chance to make the Flash joke, I'm gonna make the Flash joke because it's been gone for 5 years at least now, I think.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, and I mean, even then, by the time Adobe got its hands on Macromedia, Flash was still kind of like, it was beautiful and wonderful, but it was never the most powerful tool. Um, but I will always miss. I grew up on Homestar Runner, and so I will always miss being able to like click on Easter eggs in their cartoons. Like nothing just does that. Like YouTube doesn't just do that, and so YouTube videos are always formatted to be YouTube videos, and nothing is formatted to be a Flash cartoon anymore. It's very much in some ways lost media, you know.
yes, and it wasn't until you mentioned that I remember, you're probably close enough in age to me if we're talking about Flash as a thing, right? Um,
Yeah,
when
I'm
I
sure.
was younger, um, they weren't like point and click adventure games, or they were from the same era, kinda, but they were like animated or interactive storybooks. And,
Hmm.
I always liked them because, you could listen to the thing, there was a narrator, but, like, you could click around the page and things would happen.
Yeah,
And
I think I had a Berenstain Bears one on CD-ROM.
would make sense because they kinda came from that era.
Yeah.
For me, the one that my classroom had, it was a few Arthur ones.
Oh
Um
yeah, no, it's definitely like the same vein of thing though.
Yes, exactly. And, like, I loved being able to, like, find little Easter eggs, and you click them and something happens in the background, like a bird flies by or a kid writes "help me," and then, like, a handprint goes down the fog breath thing because 'cause they're in a classroom and they want out, right?
Yeah.
But, like, I've always liked that, and, you mentioning that for Flash videos or what have you, um, it reminds me that those existed and that you're right, that's, like, a weird lost media thing that probably will never really exist again,
Yeah.
at least in the way things currently work. But yeah, but no, thank you for sharing all that. And I just like hearing, uh, now I imagine, the whole, the migration to Austin, was probably the same as a lot of people went to Austin, seeing as that was I don't know if it still is, just given the nature of the industry, but, like, it was the place to be, right? Like, I remember,
Yeah.
Arcane opened a studio in Austin, if I remember correctly, because it was Austin. It was, the hip place to be. There are other reasons, of course, but, uh,
Yeah.
the hip place is a good reason, right?
Well, so I can't speak to, Bethesda's reasons for like Bethesda Softworks reasons for opening a studio in Austin, but the reason that studios tended to open in Austin was because the Austin Film Commission, to my understanding, actually has a pretty good set of tax breaks for game developers. Um, and so, by nature of that, and sort of it being a burgeoning tech hub in the mid 2010s, brought in a lot of game developers to Austin. That studio was originally Battle Cry Studios, which was headed by Rich Vogel and was meant to be a studio making like a hero shooter that was called Battle Cry. And then the hero shooter fad kind of died out, and that's the studio that became BGS Austin. And I believe that they continued sharing an office with Arcane Austin. So, um, yeah, it was a whole thing though, where I mean, they had two studios based out of the same Austin office building, and they were not the only ones like in that area or like farther south. They were kind of all over the city. Um, yeah, it was a quite a thing. I went down because during my junior year of college, I ended up doing my capstone early, just kind of by accident, where I signed up for most of my like my major classes too early. Um, and so I ended up doing my capstone junior year and was kind of like, okay, well, I've probably learned all I can learn about game development from college. I might as well drop out and just go like figure out making games. Um, and we had a presentation from a guy named Joshua Howard who was advertising this program at UT called the Denius Sam's Gaming Academy that was headed up by Warren Spector, the studio head behind System Shock and Deus Ex and Epic Mickey, which he will tell you. And they had kind of three requirements, which is either you had to have like a fair amount of prior industry experience, which at that point I had done QA for Bethesda, but not really much else. Or you could have completed college with, some sort of degree and some sort of, general interest in making games, which I had. Or you could be so good that they could not possibly say no to you. And in my early 20s, I at least had the self-awareness to know that I was not that good. So I opted to finish out my senior year and just do a second capstone. And then went to Austin specifically for this program. I applied, I got waitlisted, and then I got in. And I moved down to Austin, finished that program for the year, and then ended up getting picked up by Alchemy later, toward the end of that same year. And at that point, I was just kind of there, it sort of happened by accident.
So that's the sorry, it's amusing to hear that you accidentally found a situation where you're like, well, I'll just do two major projects, but it's hilarious and fantastic to hear. And you got ahead of me, I think. And in one of the questions I was going to ask you, how you got into this, and you kind of covered all of that. And I'm wondering, or you covered parts of it. So I'll touch on, potentially some of that other stuff later. But I am curious though, do you have any words of encouragement for anyone that might want to kind of follow your path or get into the industry? Or, if you were to go back in time and find a younger version of you, words of encouragement for a younger you, or what have you, however you'd like to interpret that question, I guess.
I think the notion of trying to follow anyone's path through the game industry is so misguided because every person is different and the game industry is different for everyone. People say I took an unconventional path through the industry, but when you look at the actual job titles I've held, I basically just went from QA to design to independent. So it's not that strange of a path. I've just taken some very specific jobs that are weird, in that oh yeah, I did this, program for a year, or I worked primarily in VR for a good portion of my career. But, the fact is, at the end of the day, I was making video games and learning from people, and that is the most important part of any of this, is the willingness to make things with people, the desire to make things with people, and the desire to, in my book, try to get the best out of those people and out of yourself. One of the reason we named the studio Pedalboard was the idea that each individual effects pedal is what contributes to the final sound when you're listening to some heavily distorted guitar, right? Shoegaze wouldn't be shoegaze without the pedalboard. And it's that collection of sounds and individual ideas coming together to kind of make the one output on the end that's sort of the ethos of Pedalboard, where it's a lot more about the fact that we are a group of individuals and not that I am the studio head. And I really have actively tried, even in the small amount of press coverage we've gotten, to not have it be Wheel Jam is Colin McInerney's Game Jam. It's no, it was an idea that I had, and then a bunch of really talented, cool, smart people came and joined me and helped make this thing a reality. And I really feel the same way about the studio. I am not these people's boss. I am here to be a studio head and provide creative direction to get them to do their best work. So to bring that around to the question of words of encouragement and advice is, find the people that you want to make stuff with and where you have the ability to talk honestly about, we agree that this is what we're trying to make, this is the statement we're trying to make with it. Figure out what making art and making things means to you and this group of people, and make that stuff. because, you know, Pedalboard is comprised of me and a bunch of other people who mostly haven't shipped very many commercial games. And I'm a lot less worried about the fact that they haven't shipped as much than I am about the ability to, like, find people who have a good vibe, who make weird stuff and have, like, insights to contribute to the projects that I want to make that I wouldn't have myself. And so my advice is find the people you want to make stuff with. Find the people who you can make stuff with. And, you know, I think there's never been a better time, like, especially if you're a young person coming out of, like, a game school or thinking of going into game school. It's like, well, if you have some of the skills, have you considered just, like, living with some of your friends and making games for a couple years and seeing what happens? You know? Because I know a couple of people who are doing that. I'm like, damn, I wish I had a group of friends in college where I had been so invested in making games that I was immediately like, hey, let's all just live together and start a studio. Because I would have started what I'm doing now about a decade prior, and maybe I'd really be somewhere with it by now. Or maybe I would have just made games for the last 10 years that made me happier than the other stuff I made, you know?
Yes, I completely understand what you're saying. And like, I, especially in today's market, it's again, it goes back to the monster versus the demon, right? But
Mm-hmm.
like, I completely understand what you're saying. And like, I'm trying to think of the way to put it. Um, it it makes sense, right? Like, you're, again, I forget who I was speaking with that kind of spoke to this. But like, making things for yourself, if you're, even if you're unsuccessful, and you touched on this as well, you're making things for yourself, you're going to be more fulfilled, right? Like, you're going to be doing what you want to do. Um and like, what you want to do is probably going to be more rewarding mentally, emotionally, whatever, than doing what someone else wants to do and just collecting a paycheck if you don't really care about it, right? Because like, the
Right.
the hard truth is, and this is for all jobs, right? But like, the hard truth is, you're never going to be doing a thing that you are always wanting to do, that you're always
Mhm.
going to be fully invested in, fully sold on, right? Like, so, if you get the opportunity to be fully invested in what you want, like, yeah, take the risk. Because like, if you take that risk and you're in a position to take that risk, like, hopefully it works for you and you come out happier, you come out better because of it. Um, and Colin, I am also curious, not to abruptly change the subject, but
Please.
I'm horrible at transitions. Um, but like, what was there a game or a series of games or what have you that made you like want to get into making games, or like maybe planted the seed that when you did get a chance, you would be able to invest in yourselves, kind of like the pedal board where you made a team where everyone got to contribute to the mod, like the editing and the what have yous along the way until it did come out to be something, wonderful and workable and fantastic. Like, was there games or what have you that made you be like, this is what I got to do?
Huh.
I'm sorry if the way I phrased that question was absolute nonsense. Again, I'm
No,
horrible
no,
with
I get what you're
transitions.
saying. I think there have been like a couple career inflection points. Um, the first being like, you know, I was in high school and I had like sort of a background in video production, and I had been like making games on and off, but never in a way that was analogous to how like commercial games are shipped, right? Like I was making stuff in like micro worlds, and one time I wrote a game in Visual Basic, and like I put an installer on it, and that felt like really official and cool. Um, but like, you know, nothing like that ended up looking like any of the games I had played on my PC because the tools were just more primitive and less accessible, right? Like, so a 12-year-old has to be really, really smart to figure out a lot of that stuff, or just like really willing to read a programming manual. It was kind of what you were limited to at the time. And I wasn't that. So, I had made a few games, but I wouldn't have called myself like a programmer by the time I turned 18, right? So I knew that there was a whole world of stuff that I didn't know, but I didn't really consider that like game developer was a job that people had, if that makes sense. And as I was kind of figuring out what to do for school, I was sort of thinking about doing video production because like I knew how to film with cameras and storyboard stuff, and like and I knew my shot structure because I had done a lot of classes on it at school because it was offered even at the public school I attended. And so I was sort of thinking of going into that because it was like, oh yeah, well I know how a camera works and I know how to edit, so maybe I can do that in college and I'll be useful that way. And I had a teacher that was just like, you play a lot of video games, probably more than anyone else in this school, and it's really all you seem to really be motivated by. Like, have you thought about just going to school for game development? And like I hadn't at all, and that spurred me to talking to one of my teacher's older sons who attended Columbia College Chicago, and caused me to like go visit the school and apply and get accepted, and it's ultimately where I went and graduated from. And that was just kind of on a whim for one of my teachers who said like, hey, you should think about making video games. And so that was kind of the first moment where I was like, oh, this is a thing that people do. And then the first game I like shipped with the studio where I like actually stuck around for was Rick and Morty VR at Alchemy Labs, where I have like my first code commits and my first time having my voice in a game, and that was obviously a big moment where it was like, oh, I really shipped something as part of this team. And then the last like kind of big two were my friends and I released a mobile game called All Hams on Deck in 2020, where we did everything ourselves. We shot our own trailer, we released the game, we got a friend to help us with the platform code, we started a company, we did everything. And we even ended up going to PAX South and like showing our game on an arcade backpack that I made with another friend, and it was a really DIY thing where we spent a lot of time on this basically passion project. Like, we didn't worry about whether the game was marketable. It was coming out entirely on mobile and not doing any of like the freemium stuff. We talked to mobile game publishers who were like, this won't work, and we're like, that's cool, then we don't want to work with you. Like, nothing against you, it's just not what we want to do with this game. And that just really felt good and made me realize like it's a lot more about making a game with a cool team than it is about making like the biggest, flashiest, craziest game to me. And then most recently, Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3 happened, and I got to really be like pulling the strings on a game in a lot of ways and making sure that the team had everything they need, and helping distribute work amongst the team while also having my own creative contributions and really making a lot of the pieces move and making sure that Xalavir's vision was executed. And being in that position where I get to talk to everybody, work with everybody, and try to get the best out of everyone on the team is like really where I feel the most myself. And I had already kind of resolved to start a studio before CRDM 3 was out, but before I went to GDC, the last thing I did really was like sign the rest of the paperwork that made Pedalboard officially exist as a legal entity. It was really, I think, the game that pushed me over the line into like, yeah, there's nothing better that I could be doing with my time than trying to make the indie studio head thing work. And I was going to figure it out one way or another.
Kind of like a trial by, not to put it bleakly, or what have you, because I don't know if this is a good turn of phrase, but kind of like a trial by fire, right? Like, sink or swim, it's gonna go.
Well, the right now, as I've said, I'm extremely fortunate to be in a place where the consequences are not. It's not really sink or swim. It's like go a little below the surface and eventually come back up or swim. Uh, and that's still enough that like I'm not gonna make light of the situation that I'm in, where like I have the flexibility to try and start an indie studio and the skills to support that. And if I'm really lucky, then I'll get the right break that leads to success. But there are no guarantees. So, but there's also, you're definitely not going to get it if you don't go for it. So, just I don't know, trying to take advantage of the situation I have, and hoping that if it works out, that I can pay forward all the favors that have been done to me.
Which in industry as well as life, that's always a wonderful attitude, kind of, trying to just pay it forward to, like, to do what you would have liked having done to you, or being in a position to have something nice done for you and being able to do that, for others. I just think that's a fantastic mentality, a fantastic a thing to strive for. So, like, uh for that and a whole bunch of other reasons, like, I'm, fingers crossed that you guys are successful. As I said earlier, like, I hope that you see continued success, and it's nice that um there are I don't say this in a way to, like, try and speak ill of any other developers I've spoken to. I feel the need to always paraphrase or not preface certain things. But, like, it's always nice to have uh someone that's, outright just like, I'm going to do my best to do this thing, like, to be nice, to, like,
Mhm.
pay it forward kind of thing. So, like, yeah, I hope for the best for you guys, and that everything works out, and that, you have many opportunities to continue making the kind of games that you would like to work on or make or ship or what have you.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's one of the things that I've been trying to focus on is like, it's important to me to make video games that I care about, but at the end of the day, like, I also need to make video games that I think will sell. Because I'm not like my perspective as a studio head is like, yes, the art is important, but I need to be able to sell whatever I'm making. Um, if I'm going to pay other people, right? Like, I don't want to disparage anyone who's doing like strictly creative, like experimental games, like that shit. Sorry, that stuff rules, right? Uh, for me, my goals are to not only keep this studio going, but like keep working with this group of people. And the number one way to be able to continue working with a group of people is to make sure that they're paid and that they're cared for and that they have everything that they need, so that they don't have to go elsewhere to like have their basic needs met, right? Like, my goal is not to just make cool games with these people, it's to become their employer so that I can make sure that they like have enough money to pay their bills and have health insurance so that I can keep making games with them. And that has really been my perspective on like why I think we're trying to ship 2 games this year. Why we're trying to be aggressive with like, yeah, we think this character is marketable. We think that this is an interesting approach to this problem. Is because at the end of the day, like, we all understand that we are still making a product to sell, and that sucks, and we can feel bad about it, or we can like embrace what we have to do, and maybe we'll get lucky enough that we get to the point where eventually we can just make the stupid experimental games and still keep the studio afloat. But until that point, we have more priorities than that. That's keep people alive.
So, again, I think that's a wonderful mentality to have, like, as a studio, as a head, as a person that is in charge of trying to, as you said, keep people healthy and alive. Now, I am curious about this. Um, Now, you said marketable, and I imagine that, you're not going to take the Sony approach. You're not gonna, throw someone in a costume and go stand outside the Nintendo North or Nintendo America headquarters with a blowhorn screaming at them like Sony did with Crash. But, like, I am wondering though, like, are there any are there any like your favorite games that you have that might be influencing what you are considering to be like a marketable main character? And like whether or not or just or favorite games in general, but I am wondering if like there's any of your favorite games that will bleed into the sense of marketability for a character.
I think there are a few different ones because, like, you know, we have two games in active development. Excuse me. We have two games in active development, and one that is in like a prototype pitch stage. And the prototype pitch one is much more like narrative forward. You know, play it through, and it's much more like I hate to say it's Disco Elysium like because I feel like a lot of people are making Disco Elysium games, but at the end of the day, like it's a very heavy inspiration for that. Um, and you know, so when it comes to that game specifically, like yeah, obviously like Harry Dubois is going to be like our number one, where we love this amnesiac, drunk, sad sack cop with a heart of gold in most situations. Um, but you know, when it comes to another game, like the one of the two characters that have come up frequently are the Kool-Aid Man and Cool Spot uh, from the 7 Up game. And in yet another game where we're going in a totally different direction. So, you know, I think the thing that I've sort of done, at least in terms of like characters, is I've just started wearing my inspirations very heavily. Um, I think for a long time I was precious about like I want to make games that are like really different than what other people are doing, but like not I'm not out here like playing a bunch of experimental games and wanting to be like, ooh, I want to make deeper, weirder stuff. I just keep playing games that I think are too big and wanting to make them smaller and tighter. Or mix elements of games together, and I know that's where I thrive, so I'm just kind of working in that space now. Um, I think a lot of what inspires me in terms of like the game that really gets my brain moving is unfortunately Dota 2. I have at this point about 5,300 hours in Dota 2, I think. And the majority of my time in it is spent in the ability draft game mode, where instead of getting your normal hero with your normal abilities, you draft your hero's base model and abilities and kind of create a new hero in the draft phase before the game starts, which requires not only encyclopedic knowledge of the game and all of the ability interactions, but also of the specific bugs in the game mode with those versions of the ability interactions. It is impenetrable and unaccessible and stupid as all hell, and I still play 2 or 3 games of Dota every single day if I can help it, because I just love the way the mechanics go burr. It makes my brain sizzle in a way that feels good. And I think Valve is like holding on to the best game that has ever been made, wrapped behind maybe one of the worst communities, or at least some of the most toxic people in a game's community that has ever existed, and behind a game that takes 100 hours to even learn at a base level. And I really think that there's a lot that I can take from my Dota inspirations and put into games that are a lot more accessible and easy to understand, and frankly just like fun if you aren't a degenerate like myself. And really, I think make people have a lot of fun with some of the design space that exists there. Um, it's I think there's a way to take some of the degeneracy of a game like Dota and make it palatable and fun to a much larger audience than a game, you know, than an audience besides players who haven't been playing the same game for 15 years. You know.
Yes, I completely understand, and I wish you the best of luck in trying to pull what you can from, as you put it, that degeneracy. You know, I far be it from me to call that out, but you said it, so I'm not gonna feel bad
I
saying or
listen,
even going that direction.
I understand what kind of person this makes me, and I apologize for who I am, and that's really all I can offer.
You know, I think that's the best any of us can really hope for is that we apologize for the people that we are. Um, so Colin, I am curious about this one though, and I'm gonna hit you with two questions, and they're gonna kind of have the same foundation. And this
Okay.
is really inspired from the um I'm trying to think of how to breach this. The absolutely nonsense guerrilla marketing might be the right way, grassroots marketing that Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3 got, where people started talking about what they liked about the first one and not the second one, or like what they liked about the
Yeah,
second one, for two completely non-existent games, right?
yeah.
Treating them as if they were. So I'm wanting to ask about in the same vein, for people that were talking about games that didn't get enough credit, that never existed, if there were any games that you enjoyed as like a child, or even now, that you don't feel get enough credit, like games that you look back on and be like, I don't know how this game didn't pop off. I'm wondering if you have any of those games for yourself.
Yeah, I have a few. One of the really early ones. So I got a Nintendo 64 in 1997, and we got Super Mario 64, and we were allowed to get one video game every year, specifically in the summer when school got out. My dad's rationale being that we would play the game for the bulk of the summer and be done with it by the time we got back into school and wouldn't be distracted by it anymore. It didn't work, but that's what he thought. So like that's the rule we had. And so one year, I think it would have been 99, maybe even 98. Uh, my brother wanted to get this dumb game called The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Don't know if you've heard of it.
I'm a little familiar.
A little, okay. Just I wasn't sure. It's I couldn't see if you were like inspired by that at all anywhere. So anyway, I wanted to get Glover, and I was willing to die on that hill. And listen, all I'm saying is right now I have 2 copies of Ocarina of Time, and I got about 11 copies of Glover. So we know where I stand on this issue to this day. No, I love Ocarina of Time, genuinely, and I love Majora's Mask, but Glover is such a weird, innovative platformer, even in an era where, like, innovation was still happening a lot because people were kind of figuring out what 3D platformers could be, but in an era where Mario 64 had, like, exploded, I think Glover still stood out as being extremely janky but novel, in a way that I find really endearing now, and I still love that game for all of its flaws, of which it has many. In the PS2 era, there was a game called Barbarian. It was a 3D arena fighter. It supported the multi-tap, so you could have up to 4 people playing. And it was a not particularly difficult game. You had a 3D arena to move your character around in that you were in sort of this like front-on perspective from. So like sort of like a Tekken kind of thing where you have 3D characters on a 2D stage, except like you can actually move backward in that stage. So more like Soul Calibur, but like instead of rolling around each other where it ever forces you on a 2D plane, you're always in 3D space. And your inputs were pretty simple. You could jump, you could weak attack, strong attack, you could block. It was pretty easy to understand in the same way that like something like Smash Bros has pretty simple inputs. But it had the basic fighting game fundamentals of like, yeah, strong attacks will break through blocks, and blocks can have a parry in them, which can break your enemy's guard and open up a thing, and jump attacks can get over guards and stuff like that. And so it had these very basic levels while still having the fun energy of a party game where you could throw a bunch of people into an arena and they would probably have a pretty good time even if they'd never played the game before, and had a very like uniquely grandiose world and campaign, and the narrator's voice has stuck with me ever since I first played that game, and I probably put a couple hundred hours into that as like a 12-year-old. I loved it. It was like He-Man in video game form in terms of aesthetic, and it ruled. And then I think it gets a fair shake these days, but Prototype for Xbox 360 was absolutely awesome. Alex Mercer is the coolest video game protagonist that has ever existed because he sucks and the game totally knows that he sucks. And in a world of like angry white video game protagonists where like Watch Dogs wants me to think that Aiden Pierce is like the coolest guy possible, but he just like keeps hurting everyone around him. Prototype is like, no, Alex Mercer sucks, is hurting everyone around him, and you should hate him too. Now go blow up this building. It asks nothing less of you than to channel that hate into just being worse. And it's all the better for it because I think in an era where it probably took itself super seriously, it's the kind of thing that you can look back on and take it completely unseriously, and digesting it in an unserious manner when it wants to be this like very gritty, silly thing. Whatever its intentions were, it's impossible to take it as anything other than hilarious. And I absolutely adore Prototype.
So, unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to spend a lot of time with Prototype. I tried to play it years ago. However, this was in the really janky era of getting a PS3 controller run on a PC, and I glitched and I couldn't do anything but run. And
Ooh.
it disabled like all of the other inputs. So like I didn't get far in it. Something happened. I said I'd get back to it, and 20 years later or what have you, I never got back to it.
Yeah.
Or however many years it's been. It's been a hot minute. However, I like what I always found amusing was I think you were right that it was trying to take itself seriously, and then Penny Arcade was like, you can drop kick a damn helicopter. And
Yeah.
it was like someone didn't take it seriously. And I know they're not the only ones, but it was like there was the rising like flood of people that weren't taking it seriously, and suddenly that pushed it over the levee and it broke, and everyone was like, you can drop kick a helicopter. And there was no attempt at pretending anything in that game was nothing but nonsense and absurdity after that, I think.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
And
I think it's fantastic when a game just sees that happen and then it just is allowed to be,
Well, and it's so funny too because I think back in the day, Prototype and Infamous were getting compared a lot, and it was like, oh, Xbox 360 versus PS3, and it's like Infamous was this like it was doing the same thing aesthetically as Prototype, where it was like this gritty, angry protagonist, and you had these superpowers and people were after you, but like the wackiness of it didn't exist, right? Like you weren't running up buildings and drop kicking helicopters in Infamous, and I think that's like it was still a fun space that it existed in. Where like looking back on it, it's the edginess of the 2000s that's very much like a hallmark of that era. But it never clicked with me in the way that Prototype did. Because it just wasn't as over the top with what it was trying to do. And to me, I think that's why, I think the games to me that resonate the most with me are the ones that just kind of commit to being video games and exploring the space that they exist in to their kind of logical extremes. And I guess Infamous just didn't quite do that for me. It wasn't pushing far enough into the absurd or silly or even maybe slightly experimental at the time, where I feel like Infamous was very much like a third-person shooter where you had superpowers, and Prototype was this game that I feel like set a lot of the groundwork for games like Crackdown and Saints Row 3 and 4, where it sort of invented the modern superhero game in this like in the sense of like, jumping around and flying around a city and blowing it up.
So, yeah, I understand completely what you're saying. Now, as well with Infamous, I agree that it did its best to, like, keep one hand or one foot firmly planted in, um, reality or reality's not the right word, especially given the context of the game, but, like, one foot planted in some form of, like, realism or what have you, and
Yeah.
I imagine if I were a betting man, that that probably comes off the back of them making something like Sly Cooper, where they're like, "Well, we just did this whole kids game that's kinda wacky, kind of what have you." Again,
Yeah.
not to, like, defend just the what have you of it, and, like, you're right, like, thinking about games like Prototype and other ones that kind of just commit to and accepted that they were just sort of well, wacky,
Yeah.
wonky, whatever, led to like a whole bunch of fun games, like, who knows what the true pipe between Prototype to Saints Row is, but like when you have the succession and like the levees breaking and people just being like, just do the thing, let it go,
Yeah.
like it's fun to, like, just think of, like, all of the games that kind of just embraced, "Screw it, have some fun," right? Like, you don't need to be the
Exactly. Yeah.
fun police when you can do this. Um, so, yeah, thank you for speaking to that as well, um, Glover is that's that is a wild one. It's, a w I know it got, I don't remember who I don't know if it was a limited run or someone else that did, like, a recent re-release or what
The
have you,
limited run did,
but
after Pico Interactive picked up the rights.
But, like, that one always like, that's a deep cut. Like, you kind of touched on it that the 64 had a lot of experimental stuff still in it. And, like, Glover, Iggy's Wrecking Ball, like, those are the games that I never wanted to own, but I was more than happy to rent more than once throughout the
Yeah.
year just to be like, "This is a like, what am I doing? This is absolutely nonsense." And having fun with it because, like, the that era of games on the 64 were really wild, and, like, Glover, it's been a while, so I can't speak too much to it, but I remember it being a game. It was, something I rented, something I was befuddled with. I rented it more than once. It definitely existed in that pile of games that, like, it looked fun, it looked exciting, and, like,
Yeah.
it wasn't offensive enough to make me never wanna touch it again. Um so, like, well, we all know there are games that you rented as a kid and we're like, "I don't wanna ever see this again."
Yeah.
Glover was not one of them. It was one of the ones that intrigued me enough to be like, "This is weird. I wanna try it again. See how much I really enjoy it," kinda thing.
Yeah, and then
Um,
even then, if you go back to those games, you might find you really like them. Like, I rented Tetrisphere once, and I was like, "What is this?" And then I went back and played it as, like, a 20-something, and I was like, "Wait, this game kinda rules."
um, yes, exact Tetris, that was the one where it was like a weird 3D world globe
But yeah,
kinda thing,
on
right?
a sphere, and it had, like, multiple layers, and you were trying to get something out of the like, get a little dude out of the center. It was kinda wild.
Um Man, that era of games was just wild.
But
I'm
yeah.
happy to see that we have indie games kind of doing the same nonsense now, which is, just throwing stuff at the wall because they want to see if it works and watching it work and watching it fail sometimes. Not to say that in a bad way, but like seeing iterations and seeing
Yeah.
wild, unique things. I just love it. Uh, and one day we might get another Tetris. We might have already had another Tetris sphere at this point. Who really knows? But like, just the hope of seeing more weird and wild things. That's just my fingers are crossed. Um, I yearn to go back to the weird era of the 64. I think for some reason.
I
Uh,
think there's just a level of experimentation that existed in that time that, kinda lines up with the general, nostalgia for the '90s that everyone's just like, "Man, I miss that."
like that's probably mostly what it is. And regardless, though, I'm there for it. I want to see it in some way or shape.
Yeah.
So, Colin, I am curious though, because I don't want to take too much more of your time. I kind of want to get us working towards the door so that you can be on with your evening and take care of everything else you need to take care of in the day. But I was wondering, outside of games, what is it that you do to relax? What do you do? What do you enjoy doing? And now, if games is that thing, perfectly valid answer, all the same. However, I like to ask, just because like you touched on Dota, but there might be other things that are like your wind down period or your hobbies or what have you.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm a little bit crafty. I I've been like I have like a really small practice loom that I've just been like making some things on. I like to do 3D modeling and 3D printing. I, as part of Wheel Jam, so tangentially related to games, I made a 3D printed version of the Oblivion Persuasion wheel and like got into testing tolerances when trying to embed magnets into 3D prints, and just did a whole lot of experimentation to like make a physical thing. I really like doing things with my hands. Recently went to the like local craft store and bought like some Sculpey and some sculpting tools, and I have a character from one of Pedalboard's games that we're working on that I want to see if I can just like make a little 3D sculpt from him, since I watch a bunch of sculptors and craft YouTube channels where I'm like, yeah, I could give that a try and see if that's something I really like doing. I'm sort of in this phase where I normally my time is filled up with a day job, and now I'm living on savings and doing a lot of my own studio stuff, so I'm sort of getting into hobbies for the first time in a while. Truth be told, the thing that I've been doing most recently is I've been getting up at 7 and walking my dogs and just taking more time in the morning to walk and do chores and take care of my home and myself. And that has been a really nice transition that has ended up leaving me with like a lot more energy to do things during the day. And it turns out that unfortunately my dad was right, and that getting up early and getting exercise actually feels phenomenal. And I'm really mad about that. I don't like when he's right.
Relatable.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, other than that, I watch a lot of horror movies with my wife and movies in general. And I just try to be a good parent to all of my pets.
So, thank you for sharing that. And there's a few things I wanna hit you with real quick before I hit you with some lightning round questions. Um, I can't believe that the thing you glossed over the most was the loom. Um,
Well, it's like
I
it's like a little like a square frame meant for making pot holders. It's not like a full loom that I just like have sitting in my office. I've considered that, but then I looked at the price and I was like, oh, that's an expensive hobby to commit to. I decided I'd start smaller when it came to threads and yarns before I got into a full sized loom.
So I understand that, but what I'm meaning is that was the thing you glossed over the least amount of. Where I think in most, and no offense to your other hobbies, I can attest, and I assume if you've been watching YouTubers for sculpting and crafting stuff, um, you know, uh, the craftman has such a nice voice. I envy him and
Yeah.
how smooth and soothing just hearing him talk about things is. Um, but the the just the glossing over of the loom, which I didn't know they made small hobby-sized ones. I just actually Googled it when you said that, and that is absolutely wild to
Yeah,
see
it's just
that they exist like that, you know?
yeah, it's just a little square frame, and you get a bunch of loops, and you can weave them together with a hook, and you end up with a pot holder. It's really basic, but it's a thing that kills a couple hours. And if you're like me, you're spending your evening watching reality TV in bed with your partner, so like it's nice to have something kind of easy to do with your hands that's a little repetitive, and at the end of it, yeah, you end up with a cute little thing that you made. Which I think one of the things that attracts me to doing like assorted small handicrafts is that when you make games, it's going to be a long time before you see the result of it. You might make pieces at a time, but like with simple stuff like this, you can spend a couple hours and have a finished piece, and there's something really satisfying about that.
Yes, I completely understand. I make model kits, so yeah, 100% the ability to get that dopamine hit of going, I actually finished a thing,
Yeah,
especially when your day job is like a long project that you've been working on for several years or potentially several years. Being able to be like, I did a thing and actually show the thing that you did is such a wonderful feeling to
yeah.
just know that you did it, right?
Hmm.
Um, but as I said, I did want to work, so thank you for sharing all of that, obviously. But I did, as I said, want to work you towards getting out of here. So if you do have a few more minutes to spare for me,
Yeah,
I'm
of
wondering
course.
and hoping I can hit you up with the lightning round.
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. So as I said, before we started recording, gave you the heads up. Um, the lightning round is lighthearted, nonsensical, a little bit random, nonsensical questions. So by all means, feel free to answer them as quickly as you like. There's no judgment. These are random, so you can just answer them however you see fit.
All right.
Which video game character do you think is most likely to not return the shopping cart to the corral after shopping?
Duke Nukem for sure.
Yes, yeah, perfectly. Probably, I
He
imagine.
he doesn't
Oh,
have the
sorry.
time or like the social consideration to do that, I think.
So, thank you for that. I was taking it more in the line of like some weird maligned toxic masculinity, but him just not having the consideration also works.
Yeah, he's got a ass and chew bubble gum, and that I don't hear returning shopping carts in there.
Well, that's where the gum was, right? He had to
Right.
dump and go. Um, which video game character do you think is most likely pro Salem witch trials?
Salem witch trials. Oh, jeez. I'm gonna go with Crash Bandicoot, and I'm not gonna elaborate.
Fair enough. Thank you. Um, if you were a transformer, is there a vehicle you wouldn't transform into on principle alone?
A yacht for sure.
Would
Like
you mind elaborating for
uh,
that one?
that's because only super rich people own yachts. I would rather transform into a pile of garbage before I would transform into a yacht.
So,
And I can speak from experience. I transform into a pile of garbage every single day.
so I I understand what you were saying. However, have you considered that if you transformed into a yacht, you could then drop all those rich people in the ocean and get out of Dodge?
Well, why do that when I could transform into a submarine?
There's a far darker undertone there, but sure, yeah, understandable as well for that one.
Oh, it was intentional. Don't you worry.
But Colin, that was it for the lightning round questions. I thank you for tolerating them.
Of
Um,
course, that was
But
that
yeah,
was fun.
that was that for that one. Now, as I said, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. However, if there was anything else you did want to discuss, a cool game, what you're doing, something you feel more people should just be more aware of, by all means, the floor is yours. As well, please let everyone know where they can find more information about you, which I'll also be including in the episode description.
Yes, please go buy and play Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3. It was a blast to work on. Strange Scaffold also has Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tactical Takedown that just released this past week. I do not love tactics games in general, and I love this game. It's fast paced, it's energetic, it is Turtles. It is so good. Please support the fine folks at Strange Scaffold. You can find more about me. I'm on Blue Sky at colin.how. We are also on Blue Sky as Pedalboard. We are pedalboard.games, which is also our website. We will be announcing our first game in the next month or two tops, and we should have 2 games coming out this year. Some more stuff to look forward to there. You can join our Discord. And we will continue hosting Wheel Jam once a year, where we make games based on the Oblivion Persuasion Wheel. That will probably be starting sometime in April 2026. That's probably about it.
So thank you for that. I will definitely make sure that those are included in the episode description, and also to just tag on there that, you mentioned it first, not that I'm ever against it, but the weird internal rule I have for some form of not name dropping. In this case, it's probably not the right word, but strange scaffold games. Yeah, those are fantastic games. So yeah, definitely check them out, support those fine folks, support you guys when you get your few games out this year.
Yes,
I'm a little
please.
worried that working with them has rubbed off on you. As I know, Strange Scaffold on record has been like, we have like 3 games just sitting ready to release. Um, so I'm worried that that rubbed off on you, and that you guys are going to go. Actually, I shouldn't say worried, because it's the nicest way possible. But like, I'm wondering if you guys are gonna do the same thing. We're down the road. You guys like, we always have games to release, and then just quietly throwing them out,
Uh,
and wild
the
things go along.
the perfect world version of Pedalboard is that over the next 10 years we're able to release enough games that secures enough funding for us to basically have the equivalent of like 4 indie studios internally releasing games every 3 months by having basically year-long dev cycles and staggering them every 3 months. And then having a bunch of support staff, including like QA and producers and a tech director, and just general like cross studio folks to help support those people, so that we could just be releasing games constantly, and make that stability through a very large back catalog. So if the first couple games go well, that is the first step toward that goal, and that's really all we can ask for right now.
So, Colin, my fingers will be crossed for you guys that you're able to achieve that, because I think, um, I've seen plenty of indie devs, or smaller studios, or however you want to frame this, talk about doing similar things, and I think that is a wonderful goal to have, a wonderful like target to work towards. So like, my fingers will be crossed for you guys that you can hit that, you can have that as your working system, and you guys can just be a productive studio that gets to keep enjoying putting out, fun little games.
Here's hoping.
But Colin, outside of that, as I said, I'm not. I don't want to steal much more of your time. So if there wasn't anything else, I will definitely let you get on with your day.
Nope, I think that's it.
Awesome. So, Colin, thank you so much for being here, for giving me the time to steal. Or wow, thank you for letting me steal your time and being a guest on the Red Tunic podcast. As well as a special thanks to Ronald Jenkins for the use of music from the title track from Road Steep. Be sure to check out the episode description for links to socials, websites, and other means that will allow you to learn more about or support Colin and the podcast. And while you're doing that, share, like, follow, and whatever else you think makes the algorithm work. Thanks. Till next time.